Hey, hi everybody, Rachel here. Today I'm going to be speaking with James Seward. He is a friend and an artist with a current exhibition at the Hudson River Museum. And I'm here just to talk to him about creativity and inspiration. Welcome, James.
Hello, great to be here.
Hello. So maybe you could just tell me, tell us a little bit about how you got started as an artist.
Oh, good question. One of my early memories was drawing Jaws scenes. And when I was 5, I know it's like a weird thing because, being a kid of the 80s, seeing that movie at such a young age. But I would remember using my mother's her nail polish red color as the blood in this like little drawing. And I remember my older brother saying like, "That's a really cool drawing." And then speed forward a couple years, I think in third grade, I started like reading my brother's comic books. He was a huge comic book collector, and I just started drawing these characters over and over again, especially like the X-Men comic books, and Wolverine was my favorite character. So I kind of like started learning about anatomy through comic book characters, even though like they're very explicitly like not correct in a way, all the men were like these giant muscular men, and all the women had a specific figure to them. But I started to like learn through that. And then I think it was that same year in third grade, I copied a drawing that was up in our living room. And I spent 3 days just drawing this print of this little girl who was in a corner. And like, I think she was being punished in this like paint in this, the print was of a painting from the 19th century. And I spent 3 days. And then when I showed my mother, she didn't believe that I drew it.
Wow.
She's from Panama. She's like, "Oh no, you don't draw this. Your father drew this." I was like, "Mom, I didn't draw it." So I drew it again, and to prove to her. And then so she was shocked. And so from that point on, they told my uncle, who was an artist that was living in Cleveland, but he would come down every summer to visit my grandparents in the same town. So I remember the first time after they realized I could draw, I collected all my drawings to show him. I was really nervous. And from that point on, like every year he would come down, and like I would watch him paint and draw. And then he had a talk with my parents and said, you should take your son and specifically like nurture this talent, because it's definitely something that is he has the potential. So they did. So that
Wow.
was that was my intro to that world. My father was an artist as well, but he didn't end up doing that as a full-time thing. It became more of a hobby. But he was very talented as well. But it kind of runs in the family. My uncle on my mother's side was an illustrator, and then my cousins became artists as well.
Mhm. That's so fascinating. And do you remember what the feeling was? Because it sounds like it came really naturally. What it satisfied inside of you to do that?
Just urge to create. Um,
Mm,
yeah, basically just urge, just like it was basic. I think it was my first experience of like meditation, in a way of just being fully in the moment and fully expressing. Also, it was very difficult too. Certain times, it was very challenging to try to like represent what I was seeing with my hands. But I love the challenge and everything. But it was, yeah, just this. I have a 6-year-old son, and he is like at this beautiful point in his life, just to watch him create. There's no judgment, and there's no criticism of what he's. But then it's starting to creep in when sometimes when he sees me draw, he's like, "I can't draw like that," and I was just like, "It doesn't matter, as long as you're creating." But I can see that voice coming in already.
mm,
That he's saying that something's like, "Daddy's better than me." But
mhm.
just to watch that creation at that age is a miracle, actually.
It is a miracle. I'm so interested in, how that creativity develops in people and like where like the different directions that it goes in and
Yes.
and the outlets that we find for
Yeah.
it, you know.
Yes, yes. And you would know better than I do, but I believe it's around 4th or 5th grade where kids start to see the inner critic is at the point where like they will, if someone's better than them, they will not continue that.
Right.
And I think that's by that age, I definitely remember lots of people being like, James is the class artist.
Well, I mean, that was very lucky that you had these people like reinforcing because I think that there's a way that this natural creativity gets shut down or hidden or blunted through like all this like cultural kinds of like messages we get back saying like you're not good
Exactly.
enough or you're not as good as,
Yes.
you know.
exactly, yes. But I'm still working with that inner critic in myself.
Are you, is it an inner struggle to create?
Yeah, I think the life of the artist is very blessed, and in our society, it's very challenging. I had a friend of mine who was he's from France. He lived in the U.S. for a while, but went back because he's just like, it's just too hard in this country to do it. He's like, it's much easier in France because there's a safety net, and they
Yes.
respect their artists. They're like, there's stipends in certain areas. There's so many grants, and there's a lot of support in that country.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's got its challenges. And also just being a parent is finding the way, the time management, and then now with social media, and
Yeah,
there's a lot of which is great. It's a blessing, a big blessing for artists, but it's also like takes a lot of time
for
to make.
sure.
Yeah.
No, there's for sure external kinds of like impediments, but I'm thinking more about like the internal conflicts, like with your own
Mm,
inner critic, or like,
okay.
like what about that part? How is that? What's your process like?
Yeah, well, the inner critic definitely comes out with social media.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, which happens to everybody, no matter what
Yeah,
what profession you're in.
it's kind of made engineered for that, I think.
Yes, it is. It is. But yeah, so basically when it comes up, I guess there's different voices of the inner critic. There's the inner critic that's just like, oh, this composition isn't working, this palette, this color isn't working, which is, I think, it's affirmative in a way. You need that type of problem solving. But then the other critic that comes in is just kind of like, am I doing the right thing? Like, are people going to see this? Will people understand this? How will my peers perceive and but yeah, like each painting it's a beautiful birth, and it's a battle for me, and so I try to control all of the problem solving in the beginning of the process. But problems do come up, and that's part of it.
Mm,
And sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? This is so hard. But then when it's done, you're just like, it's giving birth to something in the world.
that's so beautiful. Yeah. And how do you know, like, how do you know when something feels like a genuine expression of what you're trying to put out there?
The flow. It's that term, the flow. Like, yeah, time ceases, and you just feel. Philip Guston, one of my favorite painters. I'm going to mess up this quote, but basically says, you're in the studio, and when you begin in painting, you have critics, you have your teachers, you have your friends, you have your parents in the studio with you. But then
Mm.
if you continue going, gradually those people slowly, one by one, will leave the studio. And he goes, you're very successful when you leave as well.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
so beautiful.
Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah. And you do find that flow. And how do you get into the flow? Is there a way that you do it?
It depends. Like, I love listening to audiobooks and podcasts and everything. So sometimes, like, when I look at a painting I could have painted literally 20 years ago, I can remember what I was listening to
Wow.
during the time. I don't know, but for some reason I just remember, like, oh, I was listening to that book, or that, there were no podcasts back then, but so that does affect it in a way. But I think it's just when I know it's effective when I don't need to listen to anything, and I'm just okay with the silence of it, you know.
Mm, mm.
But being in New York City, like, there's only so much silence. But that with me disappearing,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then that's when the dialogue begins with the painting.
With the
And
painting.
the painting tells me why it's here.
And can you say more about that? That's super interesting.
Yeah, when I come up with an idea, I mean, I'm very visual, of course, being an artist. So I'll see something, especially with the current series I'm working on, which are embraces taken out of movies. And that idea came in 2015. I started collecting these screenshots, and then that idea just had to like grow and mature inside. And then in 2019, I'm like, I'm going to start doing the series. So basically, I look at the movie effect, like the way the movie affects me, how it touches me emotionally, sometimes intellectually, and also the just the visual beauty of the embrace affects me as well. So with this current series, that's how I'm like, okay, I look through countless screenshots, and then something just there's an inner voice that says this is the one that wants to come out. And
Wow.
so, but as I'm painting, sometimes like they're just mirror what I'm going through with my life, and I don't realize it until afterwards.
Mm.
Or as I'm painting, it'll kind of be like, oh, this is what this is about. This is about like me feeling lonely in the studio, or being an artist can be very lonely. And so that will come up. Or this is about me missing my pet dog when I was doing Wizard of Oz, and I was thinking about Toto, and I was just thinking about that relationship. So it's all over the place sometimes, but there is definitely a transmission that happens as I'm
A
working.
transmission, transmission from inside of yourself, or from, or that comes in,
From inside, but then it's reflected back to me
that's
in
reflected
the
back
paint.
to
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
That's
Yeah.
fascinating. And so then when you're looking at a painting, you can remember kind of like what the feeling tone was.
Yes, exactly. On
And
many levels of the feeling tone of what was I going through in my life at the time, and also what I was listening to. And
mm,
sometimes with the book I'm listening to affects it. So
yeah. I'm surprised at how relational that is.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And do you feel like you have like relationships with each piece?
Yes, I do. Yeah. And this series, I started painting it in 2019. And so they became like family. They're sitting in the studio, and as I'm painting them, I was surrounded by these embraces. And actually, I was a little like, not depressed is a little strong, but I was saddened when the art movers came, and I was like, bye, children. It was a very much like, oh, I feel alone in the studio. And so I was like, it's time to create again. But it's definitely, yeah, they were definitely had their own personalities.
That it's interesting, like, that you say that, because my experience of going to the show was of when I entered the room was of kind of being surrounded by people that I knew in
Mm,
a very friendly kind of way, because
I
they're,
love that.
yeah, because everyone's hugging each other, and so it's automatically kind of warm, and then it just, and there's large, and so it just kind of, I kind of just felt enveloped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm.
That's exactly what I want people to feel like when they enter the gallery.
Yeah. Well, achieved.
Yeah. Yay.
Yeah. So, and you how does it move from becoming an image that's there created by somebody else? How does it become your own? Like, how's
Mm.
that like for you?
Great question. So I see these as collaborations. So
Mm,
moving to New York City, being a film lover, but realizing seeing it from the other side of filmmaking in the streets of New York City. I live in a very trendy neighborhood called Dumbo in Brooklyn. And so many movies. We've been here for almost 20 years. I've seen like, and it's kind of be very annoying for a New Yorker because you're like, you can't walk down the street to your apartment because they're shooting. But it's an infrastructure that I was never aware of until moving here and being like, oh my gosh, there is an empire of people that creates this film. But from the other end, you just see the actor. You're aware that someone's involved with like the cinematography and the soundtrack and everything. But when you see the amount of people it takes to create a film, it's mind-boggling.
mm,
So I see myself as at a collaboration with these people, with the actors, with the script writers, with the crews that are dealing with the equipment. But what it makes it personally and my own expression is just selecting that image and then actually like building it up with my hands with
mhm,
paint,
mhm, mhm.
giving it its own life through color and texture.
Right. And so in a way, it's kind of like bringing that something that's kind of dead to life. To me, that's what it seems like, or like rebirthing it
Yeah.
in a new form.
Yes, and
Mhm.
then recontextualizing it as a painting in
Yeah.
itself. Yeah.
Very, it seems very like postmodern in a way. And I don't really know what I mean by that, but it seems like it to me.
Is that because you didn't? I didn't. That's very interesting. You said that because that's what uh, the uh, the writer for the Sun magazine, I mean, sorry, the Sun newspaper wrote. That's what his description was of.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what I didn't know if you didn't read the article.
No, I did not.
Really? Oh, yeah, because he calls me one of the first post uh contemporary painters
Uh,
in the article, and so that's very interesting that you said that.
it is interesting. Yeah. Hmm. And you talk about you mentioned meditation and you mentioned flow, and I know that spirituality is a big part of your life. How does that factor into your art?
I think this series is actually the first time they have been melded together. That's the first time that I could say my spirituality and my art practice have kind of fused. And I've always tried to, I don't want to say try, but I always saw them as very separate. Like, there's, my spiritual world and there's like my art. But this is the first time they've, quote, embraced. And so, yeah, when I see these pieces, they represent so many things, but they also represent the embracing parts of myself that I struggle with, the parts of myself, the shadow parts of myself that I do not want to embrace.
Mm.
And so these paintings are kind of signposts and reminders. And so, yeah, that's what they kind of represent to me. That's one of the aspects they represent to me is just gathering parts of myself that I don't want to look like, that I do not want to acknowledge and embracing them.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And
that's
also about conflict on the inside, conflict on the outside. And I think you're familiar with this example of, being in a boxing ring and you have two boxers, and in order for there to be conflict, there needs to be distance.
mm,
And when they are tired or when there's a break, they are embracing. And
mm,
so the space between them collapses. As that space collapses, there can't be conflict. And so these paintings are a way for me to bring those aspects closer to collapse that distance of what I do not see as myself, or what I do not want to that needs to be held, basically, and
mm,
bring them closer to me.
mhm, mhm.
And me meaning like bring closer to the self.
Right, that's so beautiful. It's that it's an embrace of the things that you don't want to hold inside
Right,
of yourself, or that, that, and I think all of us can, relate to that. And
right.
I thought it was really interesting that you chose some of the images that you chose were like of the Godfather, right? And like other situations that there were embraces, but they're more complicated than just love, right?
Yes, exactly. Yes. And with that specific piece, which is called You Broke My Heart, there's what I love about that painting is that I'm very interested in these paintings represent narratives to me. And so there's two types of viewers for these paintings: the viewer that has seen the painting and the viewer that has not seen the painting. The viewer that has, excuse me, the movie. The viewer that has seen the movie projects a narrative, and they're like, I remember that, or what does that make me feel? What does that make me want to remember about that moment? And then the other viewers is like, I'm maybe familiar with the movie, but may not have seen it or may have forgotten it. So my wife has never, when she saw the painting, You Broke My Heart, she never saw The Godfather. She's familiar with the movie, but doesn't know anything about the plot.
Mhm.
And then I asked her, what does that embrace mean to you? And she said, it's not a warm embrace. But also she said that there's not violence in it, but there's power in it as well. And I thought that was very fascinating that she could read that off of that hug. But I think there's still, I'm staring at it right now. I have a postcard of it. I'm staring at it right now, but I still feel that there is a surrender in Fredo's, his being caught, you know what I mean, and being like, by his older brother. And his body is just kind of like surrendered and being like, okay, there's nothing between us now, in the sense that there was a lie and that lie is gone.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you broke my heart, and so there's this like opening of like, oh gosh, like there's a relationship that we had that no longer exists the way I thought it was. But also, um, in Michael Corleone, like the viewer sees him differently in that moment because you see like, oh wow, he just wants power so much that he's willing to be like, my brother's just a domino in the sequence.
Yes. Yeah.
But the relationship between the protagonist and the viewer changes at that moment.
Yes, totally, totally. Yeah, so it is a bit mixed,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's still a collapse of distance.
It is a collapse of distance, but I was really drawn to the black and white suits,
Uh-huh.
which was there's a great little segment I saw on YouTube when I was doing research for the painting about why they decided to do that, which had to do with like these opposites of good and evil.
Oh, how
Yeah,
interesting.
in that scene in Cuba, it's like New Year's, and half of the people are in black and half of them are in white, and I thought that almost like the yin yang
How
that's yeah.
interesting. 'Cause, you don't, or I never think about how much thought and planning goes into these, and symbolism is
Yes.
actually just in these things,
Mhm.
that I just kind of just take in passively.
Exactly. Yeah.
Strange. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how much of it is like that you're drawn to something aesthetically versus the kind of like the feeling tone of the
Mm.
piece?
For instance, there's a painting, You're Coming With Me, and it's a scene from One Flew of the Cuckoo's Nest. And
Yeah.
so that piece, well, that one's a little difficult because that moment was so powerful, but I was really attracted to just the way their figures are cutting up the space
Mm.
and how Chief, his hands, I still am, but very much into painting Native Americans growing up for many, many years. And so his character captivated me when I saw that film as a child. But just his broad shoulders and Jack Nicholson looks like almost like a child
Yeah.
in that pose. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of things, beautiful things going on compositionally as well, with the diagonals and horizontal and vertical movements where the eye is like being moved around by their figures.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So how much are you like honed into like the shapes and the colors versus like the totality of the painting?
I think both. I think it's like on a macro and a micro level of just like the paintings are enveloped by this space, but there's a whole world that is within the figures
Mhm.
together in a way.
Mhm.
And so these painting, I think also there's an abstract element to some of them too.
Mhm.
And the way that they're cropped and everything, I'm really attracted to that. Like, so if you stand back from the painting, you blur your eyes, it becomes like this abstract shape, just kind of floating right there. I'm really fascinated by how this gesture can move and be so fluid, but yet represent connection all at the same time.
I was really struck by the white background and like the stark, like there's like kind of like a stark contrast between the figures and the background. And
Yes.
how did you decide to do it that way?
Well, when I was doing my research, there's a book called Exclusion and Embrace by a theologian, Madislav Volf, who works at Yale. And in his book, he talks about breaking the embrace down into 4 acts. And the first act is opening of the arms. And in that act, you are being open to the other. And
Hmm.
then in Act 2 is waiting, the most vulnerable part. And in that act, you realize that a hug is reciprocal and cannot be imposed on with violence. And then in Act 3 is closing of the arms, where you're making space for the other as well as yourself. And
Hmm.
Act 4 is the opening the arms again and creating the autonomy between you and the other. And so when I was doing that, I was really captivated by making space for the other. And so when you embrace, you are literally having to make space for the other's body. And so I took that element and being like, okay, I want these to exist in an open space,
Hmm.
to make that more tangible, and also to take away the narrative by removing the background
Yes.
of the scene.
Hmm.
Um, and to bring it into another dimension is that we've discussed this before of just always being embraced by space, something that we don't really notice and take it. We just don't really take a step back and just to observe empty space and how it doesn't change, and it's always here,
Mm,
and always embracing us no matter how we feel or what's going on. It's not really affected by the things that happen within it.
yes. That's so beautiful. And was that consciously in your mind as you started the project?
No, that's one of the things that came through as I was
That
working.
that came through. How
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Wow. Hmm. I'm just taking a second to digest that because it's really
No, yeah.
beautiful. Yeah. You know, it makes me think about empathy,
Mm,
actually. And it strikes me that you have to have empathy to paint like that.
wow, yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's delving into the source of empathy.
Mm. So can you say
Yeah.
more about that?
Um, I think it's this empathy is a it's an echo of where I personally feel we all come from, which is, one source, whatever you want to call it, whatever that source be, God or consciousness. Um, and it is yeah, it's like the thumbprint. Empathy is a thumbprint that is left in each one of our hearts, and unfortunately some people, that thumbprint's very tiny. But that's part of the play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, and that's really beautiful. And so does it feel like your art is an emanation of that essence?
Yes,
It does.
exactly.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm, mhm. Wow. I'm just sitting with that again. Somehow, somehow those words bring me to silence,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And somehow when you bring it to that, it's like there are no more questions to ask almost. It's
Someone
like
brought up
mic dropped.
someone brought up a really good point when I was giving a talk at the museum. Is that when you're hugging someone, they disappear, their form disappears and becomes a sensation. Um, and I was like, wow, that's really profound. And you never know what you're going to get when you have like an audience coming up with their own interpretations. But I had to sit with that one. I was like, that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I never realized is that, as the arms are open, there's a body there, and then that body collapses into this, a sensation, and depending
Oh,
on
yeah.
happening within the hug. But I thought that was profound.
That is very profound. And do you have like favorites out of your pieces?
Yes, and this in the show, my favorite is an embrace from the movie The Farewell, and it's called Don't Cry.
Mhm.
And in the scene, it's Aquafina playing this character called what's her name, Billy, in the movie, and then she's hugging her grandmother, who's Nene. And in that scene, it's the last hug of the movie. The grandmother is diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and she doesn't know that. And in the movie, everyone else does. And according to the movie, it's Chinese tradition. If an elder has a diagnosis like that, they don't know. They're not told that until like the very end. But the surrounding family members are aware of that, so they can hold the impeding news of death for this elderly person. And so in the scene, Aquafina's character believes it's the last time that she will see her grandmother. And the grandmother's whispering in her ear the title of the painting, which is Don't Cry. And that's my favorite one. And it's like an ode to my father as well, because as I was painting that painting, I found out that my father had the same diagnosis that the grandmother had in the movie.
Um,
And so I remember getting the news. I was actually on Zoom with my family, and I was just in shock. And so I took that shock, and I was just like, I just have to keep painting. Was just like, I just didn't know what to do, and I just went back to painting. And then as the days went on, it kind of hit me, and then we flew down and everything. But that painting just really resonates with me.
sure. I can imagine being really emotionally attached
Yes,
in a
yeah,
way. Yeah. That was also my favorite painting,
Yeah.
as I mentioned to you, and
Mhm.
I think it's really interesting that something of you came through, I think, that
Yes.
that was different and special in that painting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It touches me on many levels, especially just visually as well, and the palette is really um specific for that piece.
How is it for you to hear what other people make of these children that you birth
Mhm.
into the world? Like, how is it for you to hear how other people are relating to them?
I was kind of shocked actually. The opening, I was a little shocked of like people's responses were very, very positive. And it brought people to tears as they were talking about it. And I was kind of because they've been around for so long. And as an artist, you're kind of like, you don't know how it's going to be perceived in the world, but also like you're just seeing this, seeing these images, and you're like, will people respond to these?
Right.
And I was just flattered, I was just feeling like I was very humbled and honored that people have and continue to be affected by these paintings on multiple levels. And some people that, just on a visual component, people loving just how they're painted and various aspects of the composition and everything. So yeah, I was very flattered.
Is it ever hard to hear people's feedback about your work?
Yeah, especially when it becomes critical.
No, but I mean, do you feel that people ever like misunderstand it and you
Oh, I mean, I've had people being like, "What's with the hugs?" That's an interesting thing. I'm like, okay. Um, but other than that, with this series, no. In past paintings, it's been a little bit difficult, but this series, as of thus far, yeah. But I'm welcome to criticism as well. That just makes me better.
For sure. And do you know like what your next series is going to be, or like what do you have plans for the future?
Yeah, currently working on a painting from everything, everywhere, all at once.
Mhm.
And so I'm really excited about that one. But I'm definitely going to stay in this vein for a while. At this until I don't know what the next thing's going to be, but I definitely yeah, there's many more embraces to come.
You,
Um,
before this, you did crying, right? Or
yeah,
as
yeah,
a
I did.
theme,
Yeah, Cry Face series
my favorite series.
of portraits of people crying, and it talked about race, it talked about religion, and pop culture. And
Mm,
so, yeah, and so that was a part of my life where I was just kind of like feeling unseen for a long,
mm.
long time. And so I think that's what the crying represented.
Did it? And how did it make you feel seen to put to get those images out on the outside of you?
Which the Cry series or these? Oh, no, that series led to this series.
Oh, so wait, so the not feeling seen was when you were doing the crying
The
series.
Cry, yes, exactly,
So
yeah.
that it doesn't feel like there's does it feel cathartic in any way to see something that's internal be reflected externally?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, yes, yeah.
But you know what's really beautiful about your trajectory is that you went from the crying to the hugging.
Yes.
So it's just like you just needed a hug, and so you just gave yourself a hug.
Yes. Yeah. I think another thing about it is not feeling vulnerable, not being able to express vulnerability in my family growing up
Mm,
in many ways, and especially craving vulnerability from my father
wow.
in a way of just like he was very much there in presence, like he I I wouldn't say he was absent in the sense of like physically absent. He was there in many ways, and when we needed him, like,
Mhm.
Dad, I need you to help me fix the bike, or I need you to do this, and he was always there to help.
Mhm.
Um, Cooking, I remember one of my earliest memories him changing my diaper. So I remember his presence there.
Oh,
And when
yeah.
it comes to like emotional vulnerability,
Yeah.
he wasn't able to express that.
Mhm.
Not really, and also coming from that generation, he was born in coming from the South, born in 1942. The Boomer generation, like they had, men didn't cry. That's not something that was
Right.
like that was a weakness.
Mm.
And so I think these paintings also came from that seeking that masculine vulnerability and that touch in the sense of that my dad wasn't like a touchy person as well, like.
That's so
So it,
interesting.
yeah, so it's almost like a quest for his embrace.
Wow. That's really beautiful. It's interesting that there were a lot of male figures in your show, actually.
Yes.
I didn't notice that until you just said it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how did you know you were done with the crying series? Like, how do you know when you're finished with a theme?
Good question. Um, yeah, there's just something where you're like, I mean, with all my artist friends, and as I'm getting older, I see, their waves of expression, their chapters, and it's a good question. Like, one of my friends who painted animals for many years of like he painted bears.
Mhm.
They're like these kind of ironic paintings of bears, and there's just a moment where you're like, I'm done. I'm moving on. Like there's something else. There's a new inspiration. And it's
Yeah.
very interesting to keep, you'll have your audience and your collectors and viewers say, "Oh, I love that series," or "Can you paint me something from that again?" And it's like dead. It's a weird feeling that some people
Interesting.
can't understand. Or like I have a friend of mine who got a new gallery, and they really love these incredible portraits of these women in his lives. He does these like very detailed charcoal drawings, and they're like, "Can you do more of those?" And he's just like, "No, like
Wow.
it's like I'm moving on. Even
Yes.
though there's a lot of money to be made in that. Some artists try to go back, but it feels like you're going back into like shoes that no longer fit. It's a hard,
Totally.
yeah, yeah,
I totally get that. It's like going back to something you wrote like
yeah,
5 years ago and trying and seeing it and it just you're like not the same person. It's just
right,
not, it's just dead in a certain way.
exactly,
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think also these pieces have to do with transitions as well. So every hug is either a goodbye or a hello
Mhm.
or just a greeting. Or it's someone there's a life ending or a life coming into being. So
Mm.
there's these beautiful points of transition that each embrace represents.
Mm. Wow, that's really beautiful. Is there anything else that you would want me or the people who watch this to know about you and your art that I haven't asked you about?
Mhm. Um, yeah, to find someone that you appreciate and to hug them, to embrace them, even if you can't, physically go there, to just to show that, like, it's it's also transitory, and these beautiful characters in our lives, you know, they come and they go, and there's only so many moments when they're that close.
Hmm.
Um, and I hope that these paintings can bring that to people on some level.
That's how you hope that that these
Yeah.
paintings touch people, that would
Yeah.
inspire them to hug others
Yes, or and also to embrace themselves.
and embrace themselves. Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's really beautiful. Um, I wanted to ask you something else. I'm just, I'm just trying to remember what it was. Oh yeah, that that brings me back to like a point, a thing that have felt throughout us this conversation, which is that there is like this interweaving of the internal and external in this, like your internal life, your internal world, and then like these external expressions, which then become independent of you, and then people make of them what they will, and then it becomes part of their internal experience. And so
Yeah.
you're kind of really sharing a piece of yourself that becomes part of so- somebody else, and without you even kind of knowing it. That must feel so satisfying.
Yeah, it does. It does. Especially like yeah, when these are out in the world and they're being exhibited, I would when I was there at when I gave my talk last month, and I'm talking with friends after I gave my tour, and I'm just like looking in the corner of my eye of people coming in, and just like how they're perceiving it. I want to interview them to be like, what's going on in your mind, and how people come up to it, and how people walk away from the painting. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, and so I luckily from artist friends and other people, they say that the show stays with them. Uh,
Yes.
and so I think that is a level of I think success that I was really hoping for, when you can really, as an artist going to a museum or going to a gallery, whatever paintings are carried with me, I'm like, oh, that was successful. That artist, it's sticky.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Really interesting. Well, thank you so much, James. This has been a fascinating discussion.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure.
Likewise.
All right.
Bye-bye.